For 17 days he hasn't eaten. He is alone, surrounded by enemy packs on every side. And tonight, he either kills or he dies. There is a moment just before a Rocky Mountain winter breaks everything open, when the mountains go perfectly, completely silent. No wind, no birds, no creak of timber or crack of ice. Just silence, deep and absolute, like the world holding its breath. It is in this silence 2 miles above sea level, on a granite ledge swept clean by the last gust before the storm, that we first see him. He stands perfectly still. A wolf, large, gray, alone. His coat catches what little moonlight filters through the clouds, and for a moment he looks less like an animal and more like something carved from the mountain itself. His name is Kade, and he is about to face the torso winter the Rocky Mountains have seen in a generation. What happens over the next 17 days will push him beyond every limit a lone wolf can survive. To understand what Kade is about to face, you need to understand what Kade is. He was not always alone. 6 years ago, he was born into a pack somewhere in the northern range, in a den dug beneath the roots of a massive Engelmann spruce, in a world that smelled of pine resin, damp earth, and other wolves. He spent his first 2 years learning the mountain through the pack's collective knowledge, where the elk wintered, which drainages flooded in spring, which ridgelines the wind made impassable. Then, at 2 years old, something changed. Maybe he challenged the alpha. Maybe the pack grew too large for the territory to feed. In wolf society, the math is simple and merciless. Not everyone gets to stay. Kade left, and he never went back. What followed was 4 years of a kind of education that no pack could ever teach him. Alone, he learned to read the mountain with a precision that only total dependency sharpens. Every creek, every game trail, every place where the terrain funneled deer into killable angles. He memorized 200 square miles of Rocky Mountain wilderness, the way other animals memorize the faces of their young. He is 115 pounds of bone, muscle, and hard-earned instinct. His coat is a double-layered armor against cold that would kill a human in hours. The outer guard hairs long and coarse, the inner down impossibly soft. His paws are broad, built for deep snow, each toe spreading wide to distribute his weight. His lungs can sustain a full run for 40 miles without rest. But none of that would be enough for what was coming. His territory, by the standards of a lone wolf, is large, roughly 200 square miles in the central Rockies, a patchwork of high meadows, spruce forest, and exposed ridgelines. He patrols it constantly, remarking boundaries, tracking prey movements, always calculating the balance between energy spent and energy gained. For 4 years, the calculation has worked in his favor. Tonight, for the first time, it is about to fail. Because something is wrong with this mountain, something Kade has never felt before. He crests a ridge just before midnight and looks down at the valley where 2 weeks ago, he brought down a young bull elk. He knows this valley like the sound of his own breathing. Every tree line, every drift pattern, every shadow where a deer pauses before crossing open ground. The valley is empty. He reads the air, that extraordinary wolf sense that processes scent the way a musician processes sound, layer by layer, note by note. He catches the thin iron-cold smell that older wolves, if there were any around to tell him, would recognize immediately. It is the smell of a winter that does not end, and it is already too late to run from it.
Before we go any further, drop in the comments right now where are you watching from. I want to see how far this story is reaching. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because what's coming in this story is going to hit different. Don't miss it.
Starts on a Tuesday. Not that days of the week mean anything to Kade. Only the rhythm of light and dark, hunger and fullness, danger and safety. The first flakes fall lazy and almost peaceful. Within an hour, the sky has closed completely. Within 3 hours, the wind has risen to a sustained howl that strips snow from the open ground and drives it horizontally through the trees like white static. By morning, 2 feet of new snow. By the second morning, 3 feet. Kade takes shelter in the cavity beneath a massive deadfall, a spruce that fell decades ago, its upturned root mass forming a rough cave. He curls nose to tail, slows his breathing, and waits. He has waited out storms before. But this storm does not end. It snows for 4 days straight. When it finally pauses on the 5th morning, Kade emerges into a world remade. The valley is buried under 5 feet of powder. The creek he normally crosses without breaking stride is invisible. He nearly punches through its iced-over surface before pulling back, reading the hollow resonance beneath with his paws. The game trails he knows like the lines of his own body are gone, erased as completely as if they never existed. He hunts for 3 days across this new landscape. He finds nothing larger than a pine marten. His ribs are beginning to show. Something most people don't know about wolves. They are extraordinary survivors of cold, but they are completely vulnerable to starvation. A wolf Kade's size needs 5 to 7 pounds of meat every day to maintain body weight. He has not eaten properly in 8 days. His body is burning the fat reserves stored during autumn's abundance, but those reserves are finite, and they are going fast. When the fat runs out, the muscle follows. When the muscle goes, the wolf goes. Then the second storm arrived. Not the slow build of the first. A sudden white wall rolling down from the north like a freight train, dropping another 18 inches in 6 hours. The temperature crashes to 30 below. The landscape, already barely navigable, becomes something close to impassable for any animal that isn't built for exactly this. Kade is built for exactly this. But even for him, the math is becoming impossible. He paces the boundaries of his territory for 2 more days, driven by a hunger that has moved past discomfort into something colder and more urgent. The snowshoe hares are gone. The deer are gone. The elk are gone, pushed down to lower elevations where the snow is shallower and the browse is still accessible. Down in the valleys, in the territories of the most powerful packs in the range, Kade made a decision, and it was the most dangerous decision a lone wolf can make. Began moving south on the 12th night since the first storm. He traveled at night using darkness as cover, moving along creek drainages and through the densest timber where his tracks would be hardest to follow. No howls, no territorial marking, just a gray ghost slipping between the trees, conserving every calorie, watching every shadow. By dawn he had covered 20 miles. Elk scent hit him like a physical thing, rich, heavy, intoxicating in the way that only true hunger makes a smell. It was coming from a valley half a mile below, drifting up through the timber in dense waves. He didn't realize he was already inside another pack's territory. The signs were everywhere, if you knew how to read them. Scrapes on tree trunks at shoulder height, urine marks on stumps and low branches, a kill site from 48 hours ago, picked completely clean. This was the Rivera pack's core territory, a family group of 7 wolves led by an alpha male that local researchers had described in their field notes as one of the most dominant animals they had ever documented in this range. Kade moved carefully through the evidence of another wolf's life, reading each marker with the focused attention of a trespasser who knows exactly what he is doing and is doing it anyway. Then he heard them. 4 sets of paws, 30 meters away, not moving. He stopped walking. The Rivera pack stepped out of the trees ahead of him in a loose semicircle, the alpha male at the center, flanked by 2 large subordinates, the alpha female hanging back with the controlled stillness of an animal that doesn't need to perform aggression, because the outcome has never been in doubt. The alpha male was enormous. Even at 30 meters in the blue pre-dawn light, his size was unmistakable. Thick-shouldered, heavy-necked, with a scar across his muzzle that spoke to fights survived and won. His hackles raised, his tail rigid and elevated, his eyes fixed on Kade with an expression that contained absolutely no ambiguity. Kade held his position. He did not submit. That would invite an immediate attack. He did not challenge. That would invite the same. He lowered his tail to a neutral position and held very still, broadcasting the one message a lone wolf in this situation can send. I am not here to fight you. I am also not leaving. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then the alpha charged, and Kade ran. Not in panic, in calculation. He read the charge as territorial enforcement rather than a kill run, and he was right. The alpha wanted him gone, not dead. It ran hard through deep snow, breaking through the crust with every stride, burning calories he could not afford. After half a mile, the pursuit slowed. After 3/4, it stopped. He crossed back into his own territory and collapsed in the snow, sides heaving. He had burned calories he couldn't afford to lose, and he still had nothing to eat. But he had learned something. He had learned exactly where the elk were. He would go back. He would just need to be smarter about it. He spent the next 3 days recovering what little he could from his own empty territory. A snowshoe hare, barely enough. A grouse flushed from a snow roost, small and gone in minutes. Nothing that would sustain an animal his size. On the 15th day, he tried a different approach. Instead of the direct route down the drainage, the corridor the Rivera pack had been actively monitoring, he swung east along a high ridgeline, adding 6 miles to his journey but staying clear of their patrol zone. He descended through a cliff band on the eastern face, moving slowly, testing each footfall on loose snow, the drop below him irrelevant to a creature that has never feared heights. He entered the lower valley from the east. It was working. Until it wasn't. He was within a 1/4 mile of a deer herd, 8 animals feeding in a south-facing clearing, when the wind shifted. A single gust from the wrong direction. That was all it took. 8 white-tailed deer turned as one and vanished into the timber at full speed, gone in 15 seconds. Kade stood in the empty clearing and breathed through his nose. He had nothing. By now he had been without a real meal for 17 days. Physical evidence was stark. His hip bones were visible beneath his coat. His gait had developed the subtle unevenness of an animal compensating for weakness, and his hunting, normally a model of patient, precise calculation, was showing the ragged edges of a mind that is no longer operating from strength but from desperation. Desperate animals make mistakes. He knew this. In whatever wordless way, a wolf knows the rules of its own survival. He had seen it in other lone wolves that moved through his territory over the years. The way hunger erodes judgment. The way need overrides caution. He had perhaps 2 or 3 more days before his body began to shut down. That night, alone on his high ridge, he did something he had not done in months. He howled. Not in distress, in calculation. In the Rocky Mountain wolf world, a solo howl carries information. It announces presence, yes. But in certain tones and cadences, it can also serve as a kind of inquiry, a wordless broadcast into the dark. I am here. I am alone. What are you? He howled once, long and low, trailing off into the wind. He waited. From the south, from a direction he had not yet explored, a response came back. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A single voice, not a pack, not a territorial declaration. Another lone wolf. Kade turned toward the sound and began moving. He didn't know yet whether this would be the best decision of his life, or the last one. The lone wolf he had heard turned out to be a young female, 2 years old, recently dispersed from a pack to the south, thin and cautious, and moving through the same crisis he was. They circled each other for 20 minutes in a moonlit clearing, neither dominant nor submissive, both simply reading the situation with the focused pragmatism of animals that have no room left for social theater. She did not threaten him. He did not threaten her. Began moving together in the direction of the elk scent. 2 wolves are not a pack, but they are something more than one. What happened next was not strategy in any human sense. It was instinct operating at its most refined. 2 animals, built by evolution for exactly this, slipping into the roles that wolf biology had prepared them for before either of them was born. He pushed wide on the eastern flank. She held the western approach. They moved through the trees without sound. The elk herd was in a long, shallow draw. 14 animals, cows and calves, their backs turned to the wind. Kade read them in a single sweep. Gait, weight distribution, the slight stiffness in an older cow's right hip that suggested a healed injury from the previous spring. He chose her. What followed was the ancient, brutal choreography of predator and prey. The chase lasted 42 minutes. The elk cow was large and strong, and she fought hard. Kicked at Kade twice, and the second blow catching him across the left shoulder with a force that staggered him, sent a white bolt of pain through his upper body, and dropped him to one knee in the snow. He lost his grip. The cow bolted up the slope. He did not stop. He got up. He ran. He drove her up a slope where the snow was belly deep, and her weight worked against her, where every stride cost her more than it cost him. The young female came in from the flank, cutting off the cow's escape to lower ground. They worked together with a fluency that neither of them had ever been taught. When it was over, Kade stood in the red-stained snow for a long time, breathing in great ragged clouds, his shoulder burning, possibly cracked. He stood over what he had taken, and he stayed there until his legs stopped shaking. But the pack scents were already moving through the trees above him. 3 different packs had been tracking the same elk herd. The Harmon pack was closest, 5 animals, descending through the timber with the disciplined efficiency of a family that has hunted this valley for 4 years. Behind them, from the north, the Rivera pack. Kade and the young female had perhaps 5 minutes before the valley filled with wolves that outweighed them, outnumbered them, and outranked them in every law of Rocky Mountain wolf society. She looked at him. He looked at her. He stayed, and so did she. Harmon pack came out of the timber first. 5 wolves, the alpha pair leading, 3 subordinates fanned behind. They saw the kill. They saw Kade and the female standing over it. They stopped. For a moment that stretched well beyond its natural length, nobody moved. Kade held himself with a stillness that had nothing to do with submission and nothing to do with aggression. He was at that moment operating on something beyond fear, the pure, stripped-down clarity of an animal that has given everything it has and is prepared to give the rest. His posture said, without words, without theater, "I am still here. I will still be here when you have made your decision." The Harmon alpha female stepped forward, alone, leaving her mate. She circled Kade at 15 feet, slowly, methodically, reading him the way he reads the wind, in layers, without rushing. She smelled the blood on him, the 17 days of starvation, the injury in his shoulder that had changed the angle of his stance. She read his entire story in 60 seconds. Then she backed away 3 steps. It was not submission. It was not retreat. It was recognition. The acknowledgement one survivor extends to another when the evidence is undeniable. This wolf has paid for what he is standing on. The alpha male watched his mate, held a long pause, turned away. Harmon pack moved off into the timber. The worst was not over. The worst had just arrived from the north. The Rivera alpha came out of the tree line at a full run, snow flying from his paws, eyes fixed on Kade with the absolute certainty of an animal that has never encountered a situation it couldn't dominate. He skidded to a stop 20 feet away, reading the scene in an instant. The kill, the Harmon pack scent, the departed tracks. 2 lone wolves standing where a pack had just been and had chosen to leave. He took 1 step forward. Kade lowered his head, not in submission, in preparation, the posture that says, "If you take 1 more step, I will make you pay for every inch of what follows." The Rivera alpha stopped. Maybe he calculated the cost of fighting a wolf with nothing left to lose. Maybe he read something in Kade's stillness that gave him pause in a way that aggression never would. The Harmon pack's decision had shifted something in the arithmetic of the valley. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned. His subordinates followed without question. The forest swallowed them. The valley went quiet. Kade stood in the silence for a long moment. Then he lowered his head and ate. Winter did not end quickly. The Rocky Mountains do not offer mercy on a schedule. Another 3 weeks of brutal cold followed, and Kade and the young female, who researchers would eventually tag and name River, survived them the same way they had survived the valley confrontation. Together, careful, relentless. His shoulder healed slowly. The suspected cracked rib knit over 10 days, a process he endured without complaint in the way wolves endure all pain, by continuing, by moving, hunting. They hunted successfully twice more before the temperature finally broke. Not without difficulty, never without difficulty in a winter like this one, but successfully. The weight came back on. The ribs disappeared beneath the coat. The gait evened out. But something else had changed too, something harder to measure. Two lone wolves who survive something together are no longer exactly strangers. Are not yet a pack. A pack requires territory establishment pups, the full architecture of wolf society that takes years to build. But they are something. A unit. An understanding. The beginning of a thing that hasn't fully become itself yet. In late February, as the first thaw began to soften the high snowfields and the deer drifted back toward the upper elevations, Kade and River returned to his territory together. He remarked his boundaries. Moved with him, learning the mountain through his knowledge the way he had once learned it through a pack he no longer had. Researchers tracking Kade via a radio collar fitted 3 years earlier noted the change in his movement patterns with the dry understatement of scientists who have learned to let the data speak. Subject now moving consistently with untagged female. Range expanded southeast by approximately 30 miles. Hunting success rate significantly improved. Mountain had tried to take everything from him. It hadn't. On a night in early March when the worst of the winter had finally released its grip and the first stars of the season were clear and impossibly bright above the Rockies, Kade climbed to the granite ledge where we first found him, the place where he had stood alone, looking down at an empty valley, reading a storm in the air. He stood there for a long time. Then he lifted his head and howled, not in distress, not in warning, not in hunger, just because he was alive. And from somewhere below him, from the dark timber of his expanded territory, a voice answered back. The Rocky Mountains held their silence for a moment, the way mountains do when something important has just happened and they know it, and they are letting it land. Then the wind rose again, and the night moved on, and the wolf on the ridge turned south and began to walk. A few weeks ago, that sound would have meant nothing to him. Now it meant everything.